So all summer long, we have been talking about lesser known or underutilized spiritual practices, new mindsets and activities that we can incorporate in our daily lives to help us connect with God, to help us be more attuned to God's presence and work in the world and in our lives. And today we're talking about the spiritual practice of blessing, and specifically the practice of blessing each other or blessing someone else. So these verses that Sally read for us kind of speak of the reflective nature of some of these things, of the connectedness of it. Specifically, verse 38, where it says, "Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back." VBS this week really reminded me of these verses. The adults and youth who volunteer do so in order to help the children, in order to be a blessing to them. But I think all of us would say that volunteering actually was a blessing for us. That when we give to others, we do receive. When we bless others, we in turn receive blessing. But before we get into the sermon today about blessing others, I want to offer us a caveat specifically about that. We're talking about blessing others, and yes, when we bless others, we will in turn be blessed, but that is not the reason we do it. That's not the reason that we bless other people. In this sermon today about the spiritual practice of blessing, I'm not going to tell you to bless others so that you will be blessed. That feels a little selfish. Feels a little manipulative to me. It's all about you, everybody. It's all about you. I don't really like that. And I don't actually think that's what these verses are saying. I think they're describing results, not reasons. The result of blessing others is that you will be blessed. That's not the reason that we do it. It's the added bonus. It's the icing on the cake, but not the purpose behind it. Not the reason for the blessing, okay? Good? Caveat over. But now that I've said the word blessing like 1,000 times, let's talk about what it actually means to bless someone. I had a friend in high school whose mom was really big on blessing people. And her name was Karen. And Karen would bring people dinner, or she would buy them a gift, or she would go over to their house and she would do things for them, like a task or like cleaning. And often when she'd offer these things to people, they'd give, like the typical response of, "Oh, no, that's okay. You don't need to do that. Really, we're fine." And Karen would respond with, "Don't you take away my blessing. Don't you take away my blessing. You let me do this to you, for you, not to you. You let me do this for you. Don't take away my blessing." Karen had this powerhouse kind of faith, and I mean this in the most kind and gracious way possible, but it was sometimes a faith that was a little removed from reality, felt a little removed. One time, she gave my mom a ribbon dancer. I don't know if y'all remember what that is. She made a homemade ribbon dancer where she had a little key ring and she put colorful ribbons on it and gave it to my mom specifically for the purpose of when my mom wants to dance down the aisle on a Sunday morning in worship, here's her ribbon dancer. If you heard the laugh, that was my mother. She's visiting today. Because first of all, we are Baptists and the concept of worship dancing was not even a thing. Like that did not compute. But also, my mom is one of the most introverted people I have ever met in my life. She and my dad eloped for their marriage because she could not stomach the idea of standing up in front of her friends and family to say vows. Ain't no way that woman's going to be dancing down the aisle with ribbons on a Sunday morning. But it was a kind gift, and my mom knew that Karen didn't want her to take away that blessing. So she accepted that ribbon dancer, and I believe it hung in our laundry room until the day we moved away from our house. But Karen's idea of blessing and her encouragement of others to accept it so that they don't take away her blessing was really formational for me. First, it's a good note in accepting help. It's a good note in accepting the blessings that other people want to offer you because we are so reluctant to usually do that. But it also shaped my definition of what it means to bless someone. Because of Karen, I began to believe that to bless someone was to do good things for them, to give good things to them. So you bless others by doing or giving good things. And these days, I don't think that's wrong, but I do think it's incomplete. I don't think it's a completely accurate definition of the word blessing. And the day I started to question this was the day we sang, "Bless the Lord, O my soul," in a worship service. And I was like, wait, what? Wait, if blessing is to give someone good things or do something good for someone, what good thing can I give to God? What good thing do I do for God? I don't give God good things. God gives me good things. How do I bless the Lord? And it led me down a tiny little existential crisis when I was 19 years old. So I was super confused about it. The church definition seemed to be limited to how Karen used it, so I really just kind of stopped thinking much about it. From that point on, I say I became a before and after blesser. Before the meals, after the sneeze. Before and after. And that was really the extent of my blessing. But then I read this wonderful little book. And before I get into that, if you are like I was, and the concept of blessing others for you means doing good for them or giving good things for them, that's not wrong. Don't stop thinking that. But I invite you this morning to open up our definition a little, to expand our definition of the concept of blessing and a new way of practicing it. So the word blessing actually comes from the Latin word benedicere, which I practiced that because I didn't pronounce that word right last week. I don't know if I pronounced this one right either. Benedicere, which is where we get our word benediction. Benediction literally means to speak well or to speak good. Bene meaning good, and diction meaning speaking or saying it out loud. So to bless someone, to give them a benediction or a blessing is actually to speak good things to them or about them, to speak good things over them. And we're not just talking about like compliments or positive affirmations, although those are actually really good too. There's a lot of talk these days about the power of positive affirmations. There's a lot of science behind it. All sorts of mindset coaches and holistic nutrition people talk about the power of positive self-talk. So if we can retrain our brains instead of telling ourselves, oh, I'm never going to be able to figure this out, to something like, I can learn and grow every day. If we can start reframing the positive self-talk that we have into these positive affirmations, it actually rewires our brains. We can rewrite new pathways, and it leads to new behaviors, new beliefs, changed action. And that's something that all these scientists are saying we can do for ourselves. So what about the power for when we do it for others? What about the power when we speak these things to other people? Do you remember a good thing that someone said about you once? Can you call to mind pretty quickly a compliment that really meant something to you? Or sometime when someone saw you and gave you an affirmation, it was really meaningful? Do you remember how that made you feel? Affirmations are especially powerful when they come from other people. And I think the spiritual practice of blessing is even more powerful, because to bless someone, to give them a benediction or a good word, is more than just a compliment or a word of praise or appreciation or pointing out their talents or good deeds. A blessing, as Henry Nouwen said, is the deepest affirmation of our truest self, the self that has been created in the image of God. A blessing is the deepest affirmation of our truest self that has been created in the image of God. So Henry Nouwen was this priest and a pastor. He was a phenomenal spiritual thinker. He wrote many books, and this idea came from the book called Life of the Beloved. And in that book, he says that to bless someone is to give them the most significant affirmation we can offer, which is to say yes to another person's belovedness, to say yes to the truth that they were created in the image of God and that they are loved by God, When we bless them, we are bearing witness to their true nature in light of the divine within them. And he gives an example of this kind of blessing. Towards the end of his life, he got a job working as a pastor at a home for intellectually disabled adults in Ontario, Canada. And so he actually moved into the home with them and was working among them as their pastor. And one day he was getting ready for service, and a woman named Janet comes up to him. And Janet goes, "Henry, I want you to give me a blessing." And he kind of goes, "Okay." And he took his thumb and he made the sign of the cross on her forehead, and he said a few words that he had memorized years ago. And when he finished, he says she was not grateful at all. She was like, "Okay, that's not what I wanted. I want a special blessing." And being a pastor, Henry did what every good pastor does, and he stalled because he didn't know what else to do. So he said, "Okay, Janet, you know what? Let's get through this prayer service, and if you want to stay after, I'll give you a blessing when we're done." And she said, "Okay." And he didn't quite know what to expect, but he knew it was going to be something significant when Janet and about 30 other people stayed behind after this prayer service. And they all sit down and they're sitting in a circle. And so he kind of steps up and says, "Janet has asked for a special blessing today. She feels that she needs that right now." And without any other words, Janet stands up and she walks up to him. Now, he is a priest, so he's wearing these long white robes with these long flowing white sleeves. And Janet walks right up to him, puts her arms around him, and puts her head on his chest. And so he just instinctively wraps his arms back around her, and the folds of his long white sleeves cover her up. And this is what he says: "Janet, I want you to know that you are God's beloved daughter. You are precious in God's eyes. Your beautiful smile, your kindness to the people in your house, and all the good things you do show us what a beautiful human being you are. I know you feel a little low these days and that there is some sadness in your heart, but I want you to remember who you are: a very special person, deeply loved by God and all the people who are here with you." After he gave Janet this blessing, she went and sat down, and someone else in the circle popped up and said, "My turn." And so he just starts blessing these people one at a time. I'm pretty sure everybody in that circle got up to receive this kind of a special blessing from him. And he says that this was the evening that he recognized the importance of blessing and being blessed. That when we give someone a blessing, we're entering into partnership with God to speak the truth about who they are and how God sees them, about who they are and their own belovedness. Blessing is the way we enter into partnership with the divine in order to call forth the things that are already present in that person, the way they reflect the image of God. It's our way of naming the image of God in someone else. And since everyone has been made in the image of God, this means that we can bless everyone. We can bless the people we don't like because they were made in the image of God. We can bless the people we don't agree with. We can bless people we don't even know. Because this kind of blessing is not just about admiration or virtues or good deeds. It touches the original goodness of the other person. It calls forth the divine nature in them. And as people who believe that everyone is created in the image of God, we know that there is divine nature in everyone that we could call forth and bless. So what would it look like if you blessed your children? What would it look like if you blessed your neighbor or your spouse? What do you see in the cashier or the waiter or the fellow volunteer or the coworker that you could bless as a spiritual practice of partnering with God to call forth the truth of someone else's belovedness? When we bless someone else, we're naming how they reflect the image of God and reminding them that they're loved. We're naming to them how they reflect that image. But when we bless them, we are refracting that image. Oh, yeah. Did you hear it? Okay. So stay with me because we're going to get a little science-y for a second. And this is not my strong suit. Okay. I know it is a few of your strong suits. So if I say anything wrong, just come talk to me after. Okay. We'll be all right. One of the most delightful quotes about blessings that I've ever heard comes from Maya Angelou. And she says, be a rainbow in someone else's cloud. Be a rainbow in someone else's cloud. But here's the thing. Rainbows don't just happen. It's actually a multi-step process. The first thing that happens is that light meets a water droplet, and when it crosses the boundary between the air and the water and goes into the water, the light refracts, splitting into the 7 different colors that we see in a rainbow. And then it hits the other wall of the droplet and actually reflects back, but that still doesn't make a rainbow. The thing that makes the rainbow is when the light then exits that droplet again, back out into the world, bending again, refracting again, and that's what makes the rainbow. Those colors get dispersed into the air. So it's not just about the reflection in the drop. It's about the refraction where the light exits and gets put out back into the world. When that light moves outward is when a rainbow is made. So hear the good news this morning, friends. We all reflect the image of God. The image of our triune God, the Creator, the Christ, the Holy Spirit. God's image is in each and every one of us because we were created by God and loved by God. And it does not matter where you are today, how you feel, how your life is going. This is true for you. You reflect God. And if you don't know that, I hope you will hear it this morning. But the spiritual practice of blessing someone is how we refract the image of God. Is how we send the image that we know to be true back out into the world by blessing others with good words, with good affirmations being spoken over to them. When we send it outward and name the characteristics that I see in you that remind me of the Spirit of Christ. When we call that out in another, when we name that and affirm that, when we bless that in someone else, we're not just reflecting God's image anymore. We're refracting it, sending it outward, putting a rainbow in someone else's cloud. So I invite you to practice that this week. Practice blessing others this week, out loud, to their face, right in front of them, as awkward as it may make them feel, because we're not used to getting these kinds of blessings and affirmations. What qualities of God's image do you see in them? Is it their kindness or their gentleness or their consideration of others? Name it. Call it out and remind them of their own belovedness. Practice this week. The reason we bless others is for others, so that they will know that they were made in the image of God, so that they will know that they are loved by God. That's the reason. But the result is that as we engage in this spiritual practice, we'll find ourselves more connected and more attuned to God in our midst, more aware of how God is present, and it will be a blessing for us too. Not the reason, but the result. Let's go be a rainbow in someone else's cloud.